In the summer of 1944, the war in the Pacific had entered its third grinding year. Japan still stood defiant, its cities untouched by the flames that had consumed Europe. The Imperial Command believed the Pacific Ocean itself was the Empire's greatest fortress, an expanse too vast for any enemy to cross. But then came the whispers, Allied reconnaissance over Formosa, strange contrails at impossible altitudes, reports of an aircraft so large that even the clouds seemed small beside it. Japanese pilots scoffed. They called it a myth, an American exaggeration. Too big, they laughed. Too heavy, it will never reach Japan. When the first sightings came from the skies over China, even seasoned officers refused to believe their eyes. A 4-engine bomber, silver and immense, gliding at heights beyond reach. The machine seemed absurd. A flying warehouse, slow and bloated, its wings too wide to fight, its body too massive to survive. Early missions confirmed their skepticism. The new bomber, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, stumbled into war like an untested giant. Operating from bases in western China, it fought the elements more than the enemy. Engines overheated in thin air. Fires consumed crews before the bombs reached their targets, and the long journey home across the Himalayas claimed almost as many lives as combat. In Tokyo, generals smiled at the reports. The Superfortress, they joked, is a paper tiger. Propaganda seized the image. Japanese newsreels mocked the new American machine, portraying it as a lumbering failure of industrial arrogance. Cartoons showed the bomber collapsing under its own weight. Commentators called it a symbol of American excess, proof that the enemy believed machines could win wars that men could not. The Empire's pilots laughed in unison, but far beyond their horizon, across the vast Pacific, another reality was taking shape. In the factories of Wichita and Seattle, thousands of hands labored in perfect rhythm, riveting, wiring, assembling a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen. Each day, more of the giants rose from their hangars, engines roaring like distant thunder. Tokyo's laughter echoed through the summer air, confident, dismissive, unshaken. They did not know that the sound they mocked would soon return, multiplied 1,000-fold, to drown their capital in fire. The laughter marked the calm before the greatest firestorm in human history. Across the American heartland, steel began to sing. The war that had once been distant now pulsed through the factories of Wichita and Seattle, the twin forges of a machine that would redefine warfare. On the assembly floors, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress took shape piece by piece, its form too vast for any single workshop to contain. Workers stood beneath its wings like figures under a cathedral roof, their tools echoing through the hangars as if striking the future itself. At its core were 4 Wright R-3350 engines, immense temperamental creations capable of driving the bomber higher and faster than any aircraft before it. Around them, engineers built something revolutionary, a pressurized fuselage, a marvel that allowed crews to fly at altitudes where the air itself could kill. No longer would bombers be prisoners of oxygen masks and freezing winds. For the first time, men could fight a war above the weather, sealed in steel and glass. The press called it a battleship with wings, a phrase both poetic and literal. It carried the firepower of an armada, 10 machine guns mounted in remote-controlled turrets, each operated through periscopic sights and electric servos. The gunner no longer turned his body toward the target. He guided his weapons by vision alone, a merging of human precision and mechanical speed. Every system was redundant, every circuit backed by another. The B-29 was not just built to fly, it was built to survive. This was not production, It was orchestration. Across more than 1,000 subcontractors, from the foundries of Cleveland to the mills of San Diego, America moved in synchronized motion. Women riveters balanced atop wings, their drills tracing rhythms through the metal. Teenage draftsmen bent over blueprints, tracing the geometry of power. In Wichita alone, the factory floor stretched 2 miles from end to end, its machines humming through the night without pause. The war had turned industry into a living organism, its heartbeat mechanical, its purpose absolute. Each B-29 cost $600,000, more than a squadron of fighters, more than the lifetime wages of 100 families. Yet the government paid without hesitation, for this was not merely a weapon, it was an argument, that the industrial mind could conquer geography itself. The Pacific, once the empire's shield, would soon be its highway. Inside the War Department, generals traced flight paths across the globe, arcs that curved from India to China, from the Marianas to Tokyo. For the first time, Japan was within reach. The calculations were merciless: range, tonnage, altitude, endurance. Where men saw maps, the B-29 saw potential energy, lines waiting to ignite. Reporters visiting the assembly lines described the aircraft as the ultimate machine, though even they could not grasp what that meant. To the workers, it was simply the superfortress, an aircraft so vast that its wings cast shadows over small towns when it rolled from the hangar. When its engines started, windows trembled miles away. Its birth was less invention than declaration. Still, not everyone believed. Some engineers whispered that it was too complex, too ambitious. A machine that demanded perfection in a world of chaos. The right engines ran hot. Cooling ducts failed. Electrical systems shorted in flight. The plane's own brilliance made it fragile. Yet behind every failure came another adjustment, another design note, another late-night recalculation. America's engineers were learning not only how to build the impossible, but how to believe in it. By the spring of 1984, the first squadrons were complete. Rows of gleaming metal waiting under floodlights, their propellers still, their purpose clear. The B-29 was ready to test the limits of distance, of endurance, of civilization itself. Its mission was simple, yet immense, to make Japan reachable from the clouds. And somewhere in Tokyo, men still laughed at the idea. The B-29's wings had been forged to reach Japan. But in 1944, geography still ruled the Pacific. The islands that could bring Tokyo within range were not yet taken, and so the first superfortress missions began from China, a compromise born of ambition, not logic. Operation Matterhorn, they called it, a name heavy with promise and with the burden that followed. From fields carved out of Chinese hillsides, the B-29s rose toward the edge of endurance. The air was thin, the heat merciless, and every drop of fuel precious. There were no refineries nearby, no pipelines, no ports. Only the Himalayas, that silent wall between supply and survival. Every gallon of fuel, every bomb, every bullet had to be flown in by other aircraft over what pilots called simply the hump. It was a route of death. The mountains reached nearly 30,000 feet, peaks that tore through storms and swallowed engines whole. Crews battled turbulence that could flip a plane in seconds. Ice-choked carburetors. Lightning split the night sky. Many flights never arrived. Some vanished without a trace, lost in clouds so vast they were mistaken for continents. And yet, for each B-29 that rolled onto a Chinese runway, it had taken 6 others just to deliver its fuel and bombs. Mathematically, the campaign made no sense. Every mission consumed more fuel than it could deliver in destruction. Bombers departed heavy, their engines straining, only to drop their loads with uncertain aim. Many never found their targets, Others limped back with engines aflame, their propellers windmilling helplessly against gravity. A bomber that survived its own takeoff had already accomplished something rare. Tokyo's officers watched the reports and smirked. Their intelligence briefings called the Superfortress a magnificent failure. The aircraft was too complex, too delicate, too dependent on supply lines that stretched across the world. The paper tiger, one Japanese colonel called it, cannot breathe our air. The Empire's cities slept soundly, their faith restored in the distance of oceans. But in Washington, the laughter had the opposite effect. Roosevelt, who had staked his confidence on the promise of strategic bombing, refused to abandon it. He knew the aircraft itself was sound. Only its base of operations was flawed. Geography, not design, was the enemy. The president pressed his commanders for a solution, and their answer would reshape the Pacific map entirely. If the B-29 could not reach Japan from China, then the war would bring Japan within reach. The islands of Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, still held by the Empire, would have to be taken. The next campaign would not be about territory, but trajectory. For now, the bombers sat in the Chinese dusk, their aluminum skins streaked with oil and dust. Ground crews worked with torches under lantern light, patching bullet holes, cleaning engines, calculating the odds. Above them, the moon glowed faintly through the smoke of distant battles, its light reflecting off the mirrored glass of the Superfortress cockpits. Silent, waiting, patient. Operation Matterhorn had not broken the machine. It had revealed the scale of what the machine required. The dream of strategic bombing had met its first humiliation and survived. In the Pacific, new runways were already being drawn in sand, lines that pointed straight toward Tokyo. By mid-1944, the map of the Pacific had begun to change color. The blue expanse that once protected Japan was shrinking, its edges scorched by American advance. Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, small islands scattered in an endless ocean, now became the focus of the most ambitious engineering effort in history. The battles for them were savage. Japanese garrisons fought to the last man, defending not soil, but the illusion of distance. When the smoke cleared, the islands lay shattered, ready to be rebuilt not as homes, but as launch pads for empire. Then came the engineers, the Seabees, men with bulldozers instead of rifles, carving victory out of coral. They worked in a heat that melted tools and burned skin, cutting through limestone, leveling jungles, pouring steel and asphalt onto raw earth. Day and night, their machines roared louder than the surf, building runways long enough to launch the world's heaviest bombers. It was not just construction, it was a new form of conquest. From Tinian alone, they would create an airfield, larger than any on Earth. North Field, 4 parallel runways, each more than 1.5 miles long. Concrete thicker than the armor of a battleship. Beneath the coral dust, pipelines, fuel dumps, ammunition bunkers, barracks and control towers rose like a new city. A city built for machines. It was war reduced to function, beauty replaced by precision. At night, the airfields glowed under floodlights. Hundreds of B-29s lined the tarmac, wings stretching from one horizon to the other. Mechanics worked in silence, their shadows flickering across the aluminum hulls. Every rivet, every inspection, every filled fuel line brought Japan a mile closer. The Pacific, once a barrier, was now a runway. The logistics were staggering. 400,000 tons of concrete, 8,000 tons of steel, and the labor of 20,000 men. Ships arrived daily from Pearl Harbor and San Francisco, carrying cranes, graders, spare engines, and food for the workers who never stopped. In less than 6 months, the islands transformed from battlefields to launch platforms. From here, the Superfortress could finally do what it was designed for, reach the heart of the empire. Amid the machinery and exhaustion arrived a man who would change everything, General Curtis LeMay. He was 37 years old, compact, methodical, and without illusion. He spoke in short sentences and listened even less. LeMay believed wars were not won by emotion, but by math, altitude, speed, tonnage, precision. To him, the B-29 was not a miracle, but a tool that demanded discipline. His first orders were simple, his expectations brutal. Maintenance schedules tightened, formations revised, training repeated until exhaustion. No excuses, he told his men. Results. Crews who had once struggled through the skies of China now prepared for the longest bombing campaign ever attempted. From these islands, the heart of Japan, its factories, shipyards, and capital, was finally within striking distance. The Japanese command, watching from Tokyo, understood the significance. Reports of massive construction filtered through intelligence channels, describing airfields vast enough to host entire fleets, yet even then, many dismissed it as overreach. The Americans, one general said, build monuments to their own arrogance. They did not yet realize that those monuments were already aimed at their cities. By the end of 1944, the first superfortresses began to arrive in the Marianas, silver giants landing one after another, their engines echoing across coral plains. Pilots stepped from their cockpits into blinding sunlight, squinting toward the west, where the haze on the horizon marked the direction of Japan. From these islands, history's most powerful weapon of air would take flight, and in the distance, the empire it was built to destroy still believed itself safe. November 24, 1944. The first B-29s from the Marianas take to the air, 100 of them, rising in sequence from Saipan's runways, their engines vibrating through the coral. The island trembles as each superfortress claws skyward, climbing toward the thin blue of the upper atmosphere. Beneath them stretches 1,500 miles of ocean, the longest bombing route ever flown. Their target, Tokyo. For months the crews had heard the name only in briefings, a city of lights, factories, and faith. Few believed they would ever see it with their own eyes. Now, after 8 hours of silence and navigation by stars, the coastline of Honshu appears through scattered cloud, gray and ancient beneath the dawn. In their gun sights lies the capital of the empire that began the war with Pearl Harbor. But war from the stratosphere is not as simple as maps suggest. At 30,000 feet, the air thins and freezes. Men breathe through masks, their voices distorted through static. The jet stream, a phenomenon scarcely understood at the time, tears across Japan's skies at more than 200 miles per hour. Bomb doors open and the payloads fall not straight, but sideways. Precision turns to chaos. Below, Tokyo's defenders scramble. Anti-aircraft guns flash, their bursts exploding hundreds of feet short. The superfortresses are too high, too distant. Fighters climb, but stall before reaching them. To the men on the ground, the bombers seem untouchable, silent silver phantoms drifting far above their reach. Yet the damage on the ground is minor. Industrial zones remain intact. The bombs scatter across fields, rivers, and suburbs, killing civilians but sparing factories. Japanese newspapers mock the raids. The Americans, one headline declares, build flying castles that cannot hit a target. Officers in Tokyo laugh over intelligence reports. They waste fuel to frighten the sky. To them, the B-29 is an extravagant failure, too complex, too expensive, too reliant on weather and luck. In Washington, optimism fades. Reports speak of faulty engines, jammed gun turrets, and missed objectives. Each mission costs lives, and yet the empire still stands. But in the Pacific, General Curtis LeMay does not share the mood of defeat. He studies the photographs from each raid, circles of craters where factories should have been, wind patterns curling over the city like fingerprints. He sees not failure, but data. LeMay understands what few others yet grasp. Altitude, once thought the bomber's shield, is also its weakness. The thin air that makes the B-29 invulnerable also makes it inaccurate. The machine can survive, but it cannot destroy. He begins to ask dangerous questions, questions that challenge doctrine itself. What if the bombers flew lower? What if precision was abandoned in favor of saturation? Around him, staff officers protest. The B-29 is built for altitude. To descend would invite slaughter. But LeMay does not believe in safety, only in results. We are not fighting for statistics, he reminds his crews. We are fighting for an end. As winter deepens over the Pacific, Tokyo's factories continue their work. Engines hum, furnaces glow, trains run through the night, carrying weapons and dreams of victory. The Japanese command grows comfortable again. Their confidence returned. The Empire had faced the largest bombers ever built, and survived. But in the hangars of Tinian and Saipan, the sound of experimentation begins. Ground crews modify bomb racks, replace payloads, test incendiary mixtures designed not to pierce steel, but to consume wood and paper. The targets are no longer factories, but cities themselves. The first raids had proven what the superfortress could not do. LeMay was preparing to show the world what it could. In the next mission, altitude would no longer be a shield. It would be a choice. By early 1945, the promise of precision bombing lay in ruins. Thousands of tons of explosives had been dropped on Japan, yet its war machine still breathed. The superfortress could reach Tokyo, but not destroy it. High-altitude raids had proven elegant in theory, futile in practice. Curtis LeMay, newly in command of the 21 Bomber Command, studied the problem like an engineer, not a general. His conclusion was ruthless. If the bombs could not find their targets from the stratosphere, then the bombers would descend into the storm. It was a heresy against doctrine. For years, American air strategy had been built on daylight precision, the belief that accuracy was moral, that science could make war clean. LeMay dismissed the illusion. He believed in results, not ritual. His solution defied every lesson of the past. Fly the B-29s low, at night, without formation, without gunners, without armor, to drop fire, not explosives. The crews were horrified. To them, it sounded like suicide. The B-29 was designed to fight at 30,000 feet, not 7,000. Down there, searchlights could find them, flak could tear them apart, and Japanese night fighters could strike from any direction. To strip the aircraft of guns felt like surrender. But LeMay's orders were absolute. He was not asking for approval. He was rewriting the rules of air power. Engineers on Tinian began loading a new kind of weapon. Not steel bombs, but canisters filled with jellied gasoline, napalm, and magnesium clusters that ignited at the slightest touch. They were designed not to penetrate, but to spread. When released, they would shatter mid-air, scattering thousands of smaller incendiaries that clung to wood, paper, flesh, and air itself. Japan's cities, built from bamboo and pine, would burn like tinder. The mission was codenamed Operation Meeting House. Every detail was studied. Tokyo's architecture, its narrow wooden streets, its prevailing winds. Meteorologists charted the atmospheric currents that moved east to west. The crews painted their bombers black to blend with the night. Gun turrets were removed to reduce weight. Bomb loads were doubled. This was no longer a campaign of precision, but of annihilation. On the evening of March 9, 1945, the island of Tinian fell silent. Hundreds of superfortresses waited on the coral runways, their engines idling in the dark. Pilots received their briefings in clipped tones. No formation flying, no radio chatter. Drop zones, the heart of Tokyo. Estimated time over target, midnight. As the first wave lifted into the night, the air trembled with the rhythm of engines, 4,000 cylinders in synchronized fury. They climbed slowly, not to the heavens, but to the height of vulnerability. The ocean below was invisible, the stars above unreachable. Inside the cabins, crews sat in silence, each man aware that this was something different, not just another mission, but a transformation. Hours later, the first bomb bay doors opened over Tokyo. The city below was sleeping, unaware that its history had reached its final night of peace. At over 8 hours, the incendiaries began to fall, 1,665 tons of them, cascading down in waves of phosphorus and napalm. The pattern was deliberate, a large X across the eastern wards, cutting escape routes, trapping air inside the grid. From above, the crews saw the first sparks spread like embers on dry grass. Then the city bloomed into orange. The fires connected, feeding each other, building their own wind. Smoke rose in pillars, twisting into a vortex. The bombers flew through turbulence born of flame, a new and terrible weather created by human hands. By the time the last aircraft turned home, Tokyo was no longer a city. It was an element. The wind itself burned. Back on Tinian, LeMay listened to the radio transmissions without expression. Coordinates, altitudes, casual reports of light turbulence. There was no poetry in his tone, no triumph in his voice. Only calculation. Operation Meeting House had begun as an experiment. By dawn, it would become the most destructive air raid in human history. And as the sun rose over the ashes of Tokyo, the world would learn what happens when reason builds a fire and calls it victory. March 9th, 1945, 279. Super fortresses rise into the night from Tinian and Guam, their black-painted bellies invisible against the ocean sky. Below them lies silence, a 1,500 miles of darkness, the Pacific stretching endlessly toward the sleeping empire. Inside each cabin, 10 men breathe through masks, listening only to the hum of engines. The aircraft are stripped of armor and guns, heavy with fire instead of steel. Their altimeters are fixed low, 7,000 feet. They are flying not above war, but into it. Hours later, Japan's coast appears, a faint crescent of shoreline beneath a pale moon. The crews descend further, guided by radar and instinct. At 00:08 hours, the first wave reaches Tokyo's eastern wards. The city below is calm, its streets still lit by lanterns. Most of its citizens are asleep. The bomb bay doors open. What falls next is not explosive, but elemental. Thousands of canisters shatter mid-air, scattering napalm and magnesium clusters that ignite the moment they touch oxygen. In seconds, the Shitamachi district, a maze of wooden homes, workshops, and narrow canals, bursts into flame. Sparks jump from house to house, roof to roof, faster than words can describe. The wind begins to move. Within minutes, the flames grow tall enough to generate their own weather. Air rushes inward from all directions, feeding the inferno. The temperature rises to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Entire neighborhoods turn into furnaces. People run for the rivers, clutching children, dragging blankets, anything wet enough to shield their skin. But the rivers are boiling. Asphalt melts beneath their feet. The oxygen vanishes from the air before they can scream. From above, the bombers see the city alive with light. Not electric, but volcanic. Columns of fire twist and merge, forming spirals that reach toward the wings of the aircraft. Turbulence shakes the superfortresses as they bank away, engines groaning through waves of heat. Gunners stare downward, watching the world's largest city turn liquid. They speak little on the intercom. What words could fit the sight below? On the ground, the fire spreads faster than the people can flee. The wooden houses, built close and low, trap the flames. Even the canals become traps, the heat so intense that water explodes into steam. Entire families drown, not in liquid, but in air that can no longer sustain life. Firestorms roar down streets like hurricanes of flame, carrying debris, bodies, and smoke in their wake. By 3 a.m., Tokyo ceases to be a city. It becomes a single wound, 16 square miles of it. The fire consumes everything that breathes, everything that stands. The crackling of wood and the roar of combustion merge into one continuous sound, the voice of destruction's itself. When the bombers return to Tinian, they can still smell it, the burnt oil, the ash, the faint, sickening sweetness of what once lived. The crews speak quietly, their eyes hollow from exhaustion. They have flown the most successful mission in the history of warfare, and they know it. But success is a strange word when measured in absence. At dawn, reconnaissance planes fly over Tokyo. What was once a metropolis of 3 million souls is now a landscape of smoke and shadow. The imperial palace stands untouched, but all around it stretches a desert of ash. Railway lines are melted into rivers of steel. Bridges collapse into rivers choked with black debris. An estimated 100,000 tons are dead, more than Hiroshima, more than Nagasaki. Yet no single bomb fell, only fire multiplied by wind. In Tokyo, survivors wander through silence. Some carry relics of the night, a charred toy, a half-melted watch, a photograph fused to glass. They do not speak. The air itself tastes of memory. Back on Tinian, LeMay reads the reports without expression. Successful execution, he notes. There are no speeches, no applause, only preparation for the next city. In 1944, Japan's officers had laughed at the idea of American bombers reaching their capital. By the morning of March 10, 1945, Tokyo was gone, and yet the fire had only begun to spread, a storm that would soon engulf an entire nation. By midnight, Tokyo was no longer a city. It was a living flame. The fires kindled in the Shitamachi district had merged into one colossal inferno, stretching for miles in every direction. Wind, drawn by the heat, howled through the streets at hurricane speeds, tearing roofs from homes and feeding the growing monster below. The fire no longer needed bombs. It was breathing on its own. At 800 degrees Fahrenheit, the air itself became lethal. Wooden homes ignited spontaneously, blocks ahead of the fire line. Tatami mats, paper walls, even stone lanterns glowed red from the heat. Water evaporated before it could leave the hose. Firefighters collapsed mid-sprint, their gear melting around them. For every bucket of water thrown, 10 new fires were born. Families fled in every direction, searching for air that no longer existed. Mothers clutched children to their chests and dove into the rivers, only to find the water boiling. Thousands suffocated where they stood, asphyxiated by the fire's hunger for oxygen. Survivors later recalled that the flames made no sound at first, only a low roaring, the sound of wind that had forgotten mercy. The incendiary storm did not discriminate. Temples, hospitals, factories, and homes burned alike. Even the Imperial Army's warehouses, built from concrete, cracked under the heat. The flames created their own weather, a fire wind that reached speeds of over 100 miles per hour. Roof tiles became shrapnel. Entire blocks lifted into the air, their debris swirling skyward before collapsing again in cascades of molten wood. Inside the bombers far above, the crews could see the reflection of their work from 150 miles away. From their windows, Tokyo looked like a sunrise that had forgotten to end. Some pilots stared silently, others wept, and yet they kept flying. Orders were orders. The pattern had to be completed. The fire had to be perfect. By 3 a.m., communication across the city had ceased. Police stations vanished. The few surviving hospitals overflowed with the burned and the blind. In some neighborhoods, the only landmarks left were iron bathtubs, the sole objects that could not burn. When dawn finally broke, it revealed not a skyline, but a wasteland, 16 square miles of nothing. The numbers defied comprehension. 100,000 dead in a single night, 40,000 more wounded, 1 million left homeless. The death toll exceeded that of Hiroshima. And yet, there was no single bomb, no mushroom cloud, only the methodical mathematics of fire. In the air, the returning crews could still smell Tokyo. The scent of burned oil, ash, and something else, something human, clung to their uniforms and instruments. As they neared Tinian, the Pacific winds carried it with them, a reminder that distance could not wash away consequence. LeMay received the after-action reports at dawn. He did not celebrate, he did not apologize. His official statement was brief: successful execution. To him, it was the validation of logic, the proof that the doctrine of total war could achieve what precision never could. He believed he had found the weapon that would end the war, but others called it something else. Even among his own men, there was unease, a realization that victory had come at the cost of something unseen. The mission had achieved every objective on paper, yet no one could escape the question left hanging in the smoke: how much destruction is enough? In Tokyo, Radio Tokyo downplayed the event. It called the raid a small incident, a minor disturbance by foreign aircraft. The government censored photographs, forbade journalists from visiting the ruins, and insisted morale remained unbroken. But in private, Japanese officials understood what had happened. The empire had survived the night, but only barely. The fires of Tokyo were not a single act of war. They were a warning that the distance between technology and morality was closing fast. As the bombers refueled for their next mission, no one spoke of what the wind had done. The firestorm had proven what the B-29 was truly capable of, and what humanity was willing to become to win. And far across the Pacific, the next city waited in silence, unaware that the same storm was already on its way. After Tokyo, there was no pause, no victory parade, no moral reckoning, only a schedule. Within days, new targets were drawn on the maps: Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama, each name marked not as a city, but as a coordinate. LeMay's order was simple: continue. In late March 1945, the bombers lifted again from the Marianas. Hundreds of B-29s stretched across the sky in long, dark lines. Their routes were identical, their cargo unchanged. Napalm, magnesium, phosphorus, the chemistry of annihilation. Below them, Japan still glowed faintly from the previous raids, a smoldering archipelago of embers. Nagoya burned first. The industrial heart of Japan, where the Zero fighter had been born, where machine tools once screamed through metal, was reduced to silence. Then came Osaka, the Manchester of the East, its textile mills feeding flames instead of looms. Kobe followed, its docks and shipyards twisted into black skeletons. And Yokohama, once the gateway to the world, became a harbor of smoke. Each night, the same ritual: engines roar, bomb bay doors open, and the world below dissolves into light. The sky itself became a canvas of orange reflection, glowing from horizon to horizon. Sailors hundreds of miles away could navigate by the fires of Japan. The Pacific no longer needed stars. It had its own. The statistics defied belief. 25 square miles of city erased in a single week, then 40 more. 400,000 tons of incendiaries fell before summer. American crews began to measure success not by accuracy, but by acreage. A destroyed city became a line of data on LeMay's charts. Another box checked off a long, efficient list. Inside the bombers, men stopped looking down. At first, they had stared, fascinated, horrified, as flames spread through the cities below. But repetition dulled reflection. They focused instead on gauges, fuel levels, formation spacing. The war had become arithmetic. Fire in, silence out. On the ground, the Japanese command clung to faith over fact. Newspapers spoke of minor damage and temporary disruption. Civilians were told to dig trenches, to pray, to endure. Spirit, they were told, would triumph over steel. But by then, spirit had no factories left to sustain it. The warehouses that built aircraft, the docks that built ships, the refineries that fed engines, all were ash. In the burned-out cities, survivors walked through landscapes stripped of sound. The air smelled of soot and salt, the ruins still warm beneath their feet. Temples stood roofless, their bells melted into puddles of bronze. Farmers returning from the countryside could no longer find their neighborhoods. The streets had lost shape, the landmarks reduced to dust. At night, the glow from distant fires lit the horizon like dawn. People began to sleep underground, listening for the hum of engines that meant death was near. Some called the bombers Yoru no Okami, wolves of the night. They came not for battle, but for harvest. LeMay's reports to Washington were precise and detached. He noted bomb loads, weather conditions, average burn radius. His tone was clinical. His results undeniable. Japan's war industry had collapsed. Its cities no longer produced. They only absorbed destruction. Yet the raids continued because war, once mechanized, does not easily stop. In the ruins, one Japanese engineer wrote in his diary, "We thought our spirit could protect us, but our spirit cannot breathe fireproof air." By the summer of 1945, 67 Japanese cities had burned. Millions were homeless. The empire's lungs were filled with smoke, its heart still beating only from inertia. Above it all, the B-29s continued their endless procession, silver wings against the rising ash. They had conquered distance, defied altitude, and rewritten the boundaries of destruction. But even as the fires raged, a new weapon was being prepared, one that would make even this inferno seem small. For in the deserts of New Mexico, the next dawn was already being built. By the spring of 1945, the B-29 had no rival left in the sky. It was not just a bomber, it was a flying city of steel and circuits, a machine built at the edge of human imagination. With its pressurized cabins, remote-controlled turrets, and self-sealing tanks, it could cross oceans, climb beyond flak, and return even when half its systems were gone. German engineers, studying fragments of downed aircraft, called it a bomber a generation ahead. The Japanese called it something else, the enemy's thunder god. From the Marianas, the sky itself became an assembly line of destruction. The superfortresses rose in waves, each one carrying 12 tons of fire. They flew 15-hour missions over water so vast that a single navigational error meant death. Inside, the crews endured a private kind of war. Frostbite, exhaustion, and silence, broken only by the mechanical heartbeat of 4 Wright R-3350 engines. Some men said the engines spoke to them, a rhythm that promised survival if you listened closely enough. At altitude, the air was thin, the temperatures merciless. Oxygen masks froze to faces, frost-coated gun sights, and flight suits stiffened like armor. Below, the Pacific stretched endless and black, a mirror to the moral void opening beneath the war itself. Each mission demanded not just courage, but a surrender of doubt. The question was no longer, should we, but how many more times until it ends? Japan's war machine began to collapse, not from defeat in battle, but from suffocation. Oil refineries vanished in explosions so vast they left craters the size of stadiums. Railways melted in the heat of incendiary raids. Entire transport networks ceased to exist. Within weeks, fuel became more precious than bullets. Fighters sat motionless on runways, their engines empty. The empire that once boasted of divine protection now found itself praying for fuel. In the ruins of the cities, civilians wandered through landscapes that no longer felt real. The survivors of Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya no longer spoke of the war's purpose, only of its aftermath. They described skies that burned brighter than the sun, rivers that ran black with ash, and nights where the air itself seemed to scream. "Even the gods," one priest wrote, "have turned their faces away." Back on Tinian, the rhythm of efficiency continued. Ground crews rearmed and refueled with machine-like precision. Each returning bomber brought data, fuel consumption, wind speed, bombing density, transforming destruction into mathematics. LeMay studied the numbers without sentiment. In his mind, every successful mission shortened the war. Every burned city bought one less invasion. To him, the firestorms were not chaos. They were order, enforced at altitude. Yet for the men who flew them, the lines between victory and annihilation began to blur. Some wrote home of flying through hell. Others confessed that the fires below no longer looked like cities, only patterns of light. One navigator compared it to watching stars die. The distance, once a mercy, became a mirror. They could not see faces, only consequences. The B-29 was proof of what the modern age could do, how metal and mathematics could conquer geography itself. It was a machine born of genius and necessity, capable of both precision and obliteration. Its creation united a continent of factories, millions of workers, and an industrial will unmatched in history. But it also revealed something deeper, that progress, once weaponized, no longer served morality. It obeyed only momentum. As Japan's cities disappeared one after another, the B-29s grew into symbols of inevitability. They were engines of apocalypse, not because they carried evil, but because they carried logic to its final conclusion. And in that logic, something irreversible was awakening. A weapon had been perfected, but somewhere in the deserts of New Mexico, another was about to make even this perfection obsolete. In the shadow of progress, the true age of annihilation was about to begin. At 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, the city of Hiroshima was already awake. Streetcars moved through narrow avenues, children walked to school, and workers gathered near the riverfront. The air was clear, a rare calm after months of anticipation. Then, from 31,000 feet above, a silver silhouette crossed the morning sun. Its name was Enola Gay. The B-29 had made this journey before. Long range, high altitude, methodical precision. But this time, its payload was not fire, nor explosives. It was something new, something born from silence and secrecy, a 9,000-pound weapon of uranium, codenamed Little Boy. At 8:16, the bomb fell away. 43 seconds later, the sky turned white. The light moved faster than sound, faster than comprehension. It flattened the heart of Hiroshima in an instant. Concrete evaporated, shadows burned themselves into walls, and rivers filled with steam and flame. Within seconds, 70,000 people ceased to exist, not through fire or metal, but through the absence of both. For the crew above, there was no explosion, only a blinding flash that filled the cabin. Then came the shock wave, a force so immense it lifted the aircraft like a leaf in a hurricane. Below, The city that had existed for 4 centuries was gone. From the air, it looked as though a giant hand had erased it from the earth. 3 days later, the mission was repeated. August 9th, Boxcar departed from Tinian with a weapon more complex, more terrible. This one used plutonium, Fat Man. Its target was Kokura, but clouds spared the city. The bomber turned toward its secondary objective, Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m., another sun ignited over Japan. The second city vanished in light and silence. In Tokyo, word spread slowly. The Japanese High Command, already reeling from months of firebombing, could not fathom what had happened. Reports described cities disappeared, shadows etched into stone. The scientists confirmed what few believed possible, that a single aircraft had done what 1,000 could not. For the first time, even the war's architects understood that this was no longer a fight for survival. It was a confrontation with extinction. The empire that had once promised to rule Asia for 1,000 years now faced an enemy that could unmake time itself. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito recorded his voice for the first time in history. His message, quiet and deliberate, reached a broken nation through static. We must endure the unendurable to save the people from further suffering. The war that began with belief in divine destiny ended with surrender to science. For the men who built the B-29, this was the fulfillment of its design. The machine had done what it was made to do, reach the unreachable, strike the untouchable. But in that success lay a new terror. The aircraft that burned Tokyo had now ended the war, not through victory, but through revelation. Humanity had seen what it was capable of, and it could never look away again. In Hiroshima's ruins, doctors treated burns they had never seen before. Children wandered without names, their skin translucent, their shadows fused to the ground. The survivors, Hibakusha, spoke of a wind that stripped flesh from bone, a heat that erased memory. The city did not die quietly. It became a mirror, showing mankind its own reflection in pure light. The B-29 returned to base. The crew wrote their reports, refueled, and waited for orders that would never come. The war was over, but for those who flew that day, the victory was heavier than the bomb itself. They had seen the moment when technology surpassed humanity, when the sky became both deliverer and judge, and across the world, as news spread of a single plane destroying a city, one truth settled like ash. What began as engineering had become theology. The age of fire was over. The atomic dawn had begun. On August 15, 1945, Japan listened to a voice it had never heard before. Through the crackle of radio static came the tone of Emperor Hirohito, distant, trembling, yet absolute. For centuries he had been silent, divine, unseen. Now, for the first time, he spoke. "We must endure the unendurable," he said, "and bear the unbearable." The war was over. Across the nation, millions knelt on tatami floors. Soldiers stood motionless, their rifles pointed downward. Mothers clutched photographs of sons who would never return. The sound that had filled Japan for years, the sirens, the engines, the bombs, was gone. What replaced it was silence. Above that silence, the same B-29s that had once brought death now crossed the skies again, but their bomb bays carried no fire. They dropped sacks of food, medicine, and supplies over cities they had once erased. Children who had fled from their roar now watched them in awe, waving at the silver wings that glittered in the sunlight. It was a strange reversal. The destroyer had become the deliverer. In those flights, mercy descended from the same altitudes that had once burned the earth. The paradox of modern war had never been clearer, that salvation and destruction could come from the same machine, depending only on the will behind it. In Tokyo, General Curtis LeMay walked among the ruins. The streets were unrecognizable, blackened foundations, twisted girders, the smell of ash that no wind could carry away. He had commanded the fire, calculated its spread, and watched its results. Yet standing amid the wreckage, he felt no triumph. There was no victory march here, no banners, no applause. Only proof that industrial logic had outpaced human reason. To the Japanese, the surrender was not defeat so much as awakening. The empire that had promised eternity now faced impermanence. Its soldiers returned home to find cities that no longer existed. Its people began to rebuild, not from pride, but from humility. The same discipline that once forged weapons now forged peace. In the following weeks, American occupation forces entered Japan without resistance. Bombers flew overhead, unopposed, guiding the arrival of troops and relief ships. The B-29 became a symbol not of terror, but of transformation, an emblem of how power, once unleashed, could evolve into responsibility. Yet for many who had built or flown those machines, peace brought no relief. They had seen the world burn at their command, and victory felt hollow. The war had been won, but the simplicity of good and evil had been lost somewhere above the clouds. The B-29 had proven that progress could save or destroy, and that men rarely knew which they were doing until it was too late. In the ashes of Tokyo, one Japanese civilian wrote in his diary, "The sky that took everything from us is now feeding us. I cannot decide whether to forgive it or to thank it." The laughter that had begun in 1944, the confidence, the mockery, the belief that America's machines were too heavy, too slow, too soft, had long since turned to silence. The war had ended not with courage, but with comprehension. And as the last B-29s circled above the broken cities, their shadows stretched across both past and future, reminders that the power to destroy had finally forced humanity to learn what it meant to rebuild. The empire had surrendered, but the age of the machine had only just begun. In the calm that followed surrender, engineers turned back to their machines. What had once been instruments of destruction were now blueprints for the future. The B-29, born from desperation, refined in war, became a case study in human ingenuity. Its systems were dissected by scientists across the world. Pressurized cabins, radar navigation, remote-controlled gun turrets. What had once terrified the world would now define its next age. At Wright Field, American engineers catalogued the lessons learned from 4 years of fire and flight. They saw not just a bomber, but the foundation of what would come: the jet age, the nuclear triad, the logic of deterrence. Every circuit, every rivet carried the weight of experience bought in blood. The B-29 had proven that distance no longer protected anyone, that the sky itself had become a frontier of accountability. In Washington, General Curtis LeMay was already looking ahead. The same man who had commanded the Inferno over Tokyo now built the Strategic Air Command, a network of bases, bombers, and men trained to strike anywhere on Earth within hours. He turned wartime destruction into peacetime doctrine. His creed was simple and terrifying. Peace is the product of capability. The lessons of the B-29, range, endurance, precision, became the backbone of Cold War strategy. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, Japan faced a different kind of reconstruction. Cities once erased by flame began to rise again from their ashes. Tokyo, blackened, skeletal, and silent, transformed into a city of steel and glass within a decade. The same industrial spirit that once built war machines now powered factories for cars, electronics, and ships. In the ruins, America saw not a defeated enemy, but a future ally. American aid poured in. Food, tools, machinery. Engineers and teachers replaced soldiers and generals. The ashes of 1945 became the soil of rebirth. Japan's economy grew faster than any in history. By the 1960s, its factories hummed with a new kind of rhythm, not the sound of war, but of production, design, and invention. The empire that once sought dominance through conquest now conquered through craftsmanship. For the survivors, the memories of the firestorms never faded. They spoke of the nights when the sky glowed red, when wind became flame and flame became wind. Yet, as years passed, those memories began to carry a strange duality. The fire that destroyed also cleansed. The defeat that shamed also liberated. Japan emerged not merely rebuilt, but reborn, disciplined by loss, strengthened by humility. Historians later described it as one of history's great paradoxes. The weapon meant to destroy an empire had instead helped to create a democracy. The very aircraft designed to bring submission had inadvertently taught a lesson in endurance and reinvention. Through ruin, Japan had learned the cost of arrogance and the necessity of reason. Back in America, engineers who had built the superfortress moved on to new frontiers. Many joined Lockheed's Skunk Works, designing the next generation of flight, the U-2, the SR-71, the B-52. Each carried echoes of the B-29's innovations, the mastery of altitude, the faith in complexity, the belief that the future could be engineered. The men who once built the fortress of the skies had become architects of the modern world. Fire, it seemed, had not only consumed, it had transformed. The industrial might that once fueled war was now building peace, prosperity, and progress. But beneath every gleaming wing and rising skyline lingered an unspoken truth, that the brilliance of human invention could never be separated from its capacity for ruin. From the heat of war came the engines of peace, and from the architects of Inferno, the blueprint of the modern age. In the years after the war, the fires of Tokyo and the ruins of Hiroshima became questions rather than victories. Historians, philosophers, and soldiers stood before the same inferno and saw different truths. Some called it necessary, the final act that saved millions from invasion. Others called it monstrous, the first glimpse of humanity's self-destruction, carried out with mathematics instead of malice. The debates began quietly, in classrooms and courtrooms, then grew louder as the decades passed. Was this the price of peace or the proof of our arrogance? The B-29 raids were studied not only as battles, but as warnings, the moment when war stopped being human and became procedural. Coordinates replaced compassion. Altitude replaced empathy. Death arrived not from rage, but from calculation. Ethicists would later call it the first modern apocalypse, an event not of chaos, but of order. The firestorms of Tokyo were not accidents of nature, but the deliberate outcome of chemistry, wind, and willpower. They burned with scientific precision. Wooden cities became equations. Oxygen became fuel. Human lives became data points in a strategy of total destruction. It was, as one scholar wrote, the day the world discovered efficiency could kill. The men who carried out the missions lived with the memory differently. Pilots defended their duty with quiet conviction. It was war, not murder, they said. If we had not done it, someone else would have died instead. Their logic was simple and perhaps honest, but even decades later, in interviews and memoirs, many paused mid-sentence, as though unsure which part of the story they were allowed to claim. For the survivors on the ground, there was no such ambiguity. They remembered the sound before the fire, the hum that grew into thunder, and the color of the sky as it turned from orange to black, then to nothing. Some remembered holding children who simply disappeared into smoke. Others described the wind that blew so hot it peeled the bark off trees. The fire took more than lives. It took the illusion that civilization was permanent. In that silence after the flames, the B-29 became more than a machine. It became a symbol of triumph and tragedy, of human genius turned inward. It had proved the double edge of progress, that the same hands capable of invention could just as easily unmake the world they built. The bomber was both savior and executioner, proof that technology serves only the morality of those who wield it. As time passed, the memory of those nights settled into history's conscience. Museums displayed fragments of melted metal and charred stone. Tourists stared at photographs of a city turned to light. Yet the lesson was never about the weapon itself. It was about the mind that believed such power could be controlled. Every civilization that mocks progress, that underestimates knowledge or scorns innovation, eventually learns its cost. And every civilization that worships progress without conscience learns it again. The line between salvation and damnation has always been drawn by human intent, and fire has always been its teacher. From the ashes of Tokyo, one truth endured, that in every age the greatest threat to humanity is not the machine, but the faith that it will save us. In 1944, Japanese commanders laughed. They laughed at the arrogance of a nation that believed it could cross an ocean and bring war to their doorstep. They laughed at the idea of a bomber so massive it could carry its own weather across the Pacific. They laughed because to them, America's distance was its weakness, and its ambition, its flaw. But by the following year, that laughter had turned to silence, the kind of silence that follows the end of a world. Over Tokyo, the sky burned brighter than the dawn. Flames leapt higher than temples, and entire districts vanished before the first light of morning. What had once been mockery was now memory, scattered in the ashes of a city that had believed it could not be touched. The B-29 had crossed not just miles, but imagination itself. It turned the impossible into routine, a machine capable of shrinking oceans and rewriting the meaning of distance. What began as a blueprint in Seattle became a prophecy over Japan, that the next era of war would be ruled not by empires, but by engineers. Each raid over the Pacific was more than strategy. It was revelation. The B-29 proved that victory no longer belonged to the boldest soldier, but to the quiet precision of those who built what others could not comprehend. Wars, it seemed, were no longer won by courage alone, but by comprehension. Japan had believed that spirit could overcome steel, that devotion could outlast machinery, but faith without understanding had met its limit. The empire's will was unbroken, yet its factories were gone, its fleets sunk, its skies owned by the very machines it had dismissed. The laughter that began in confidence ended in disbelief. As the fires dimmed and peace took its uneasy shape, the lesson remained, not just for Japan, but for every nation that believed superiority was permanent. The B-29 was more than a weapon. It was a mirror. In it, humanity saw both its brilliance and its blindness. It revealed that progress without humility leads inevitably to reckoning. Historians would later call it the moment modern warfare came of age. For the first time, technology had not just supported the war, it had defined it. The sky became the new battlefield, and knowledge became the new power. From that point forward, no leader could laugh at the machine without understanding what it represented: the triumph of intellect over instinct, of calculation over courage. And yet, beneath the pride of innovation, lingered a quiet unease. For those who built and flew the B-29, victory carried its own gravity. They had seen cities vanish at their command, and with each success came the haunting question: Had they crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? Progress had delivered supremacy, but not peace of mind. In Japan, survivors rebuilt their cities from the blackened earth. Children played where ashes once fell. Factories rose again, this time to make cameras, cars, and radios. The same discipline that once forged weapons now built a new kind of power, the ability to create rather than destroy. From the ruins, Japan learned the lesson America had delivered, that mastery of the machine demands mastery of the self. The B-29's engines have long since gone quiet. Its wings rest in museums, its pilots in silence, yet its echo remains in every jet, every satellite, every weapon that promises precision and peace in equal measure. It was the aircraft that ended a war and began an age. In 1944, they laughed. They laughed at what they did not understand, at metal too large to fly, at an idea too vast to imagine. A year later, their capital burned with the light of a second sun. The B-29 had proven not just that power could cross the Pacific, but that arrogance could not. They laughed once, they never laughed again.